This property is now subject to a $90,000 association lien, and if you don't pay within 30 days, we will foreclose and sell it on the courthouse steps." That was the voice of Diane Coyle, president of the Cedar Bluff Homeowners Association, reading from a single sheet of paper she had slid under my front door at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. She was talking about my house. The house my wife and I had paid off 2 years before she died. The house where my daughter still slept upstairs, with the door cracked so the hall light could reach her. What Diane did not know, standing there in her cream blazer and her good shoes on my gravel, was that I owned the paper on her own house. Not figuratively. I held her mortgage. The note on her 4,000 square foot showpiece up on the ridge ran through a small, private lending fund. And that fund had one investor, and that investor was me. I had bought the loan 11 months earlier, at a discount, from a regional bank that wanted it off their books. She had been mailing her payments to a servicing company with a post office box in Denver, and that money had been landing every month in an account with my name on the signature card. So I want to ask you something before I tell you the rest of it. A woman hands you a lien for $90,000 on the home your late wife loved, and you are quietly holding the deed of trust on her mansion. What would you have done? Comment and tell me, because I have a feeling some of you would not have waited as long as I did. My name is Walter Hale. I am 61 years old, and for 34 years I worked as a commercial loan officer, and then a workout specialist for 2 different banks, which is a fancy way of saying I spent my career reading the fine print on other people's debts and figuring out who actually owned what when everything fell apart. I retired early when my wife, Carol, got sick. We had bought 11 acres on the eastern edge of Cedar Bluff back when it was just ranch land and a county road, long before the developer came in and built the gated section up the hill and called the whole thing a community. Our deed predated their plat by 19 years. I knew that the way I knew my own birthday, because I am the kind of man who reads the deed before he reads the contract, and reads the contract before he signs his name. Carol and I raised our daughter May on that land. May was 16 now, all knees and opinions. And she had her mother's habit of narrowing her eyes when an adult said something that did not add up. She had Carol's hands, too, square and capable, and by the time she was 12, she could hold a flashlight steady on a carburetor, longer than most grown men I knew. After Carol passed, it was the 2 of us and a yellow dog named Biscuit, and a workshop where I rebuilt small engines for neighbors who paid me in firewood and venison and the occasional case of beer. That was the life Diane Coyle decided was a problem. I should tell you about the house itself, because it is the thing all of this was over, and it was never grand. Carol and I built it in stages over the first 10 years, a room at a time as we could afford the lumber. The kitchen floor is fir, I planed by hand. The back porch is where Carol sat every evening she was strong enough, at the end, looking west, at the same light I would one day watch with our daughter. And we paid the mortgage off 2 years before she got sick, and the day I made the last payment she stood in that kitchen and cried, not because of the money, but because she said now no one could ever take it. I told her no one would. I am the kind of man who keeps a promise the way I keep a record, which is to say completely, and in writing where I can. That promise is the spine of everything that happened next, and I want you to hold it in your mind, because 3 years later, a woman in good shoes stood on my gravel and tried to make a liar of me. The trouble started small, the way it always does. I want to be fair about that. The first contact was not a lien. It was a letter the spring before printed on heavy stock with the association's logo embossed at the top, informing me that my property was now considered part of the Cedar Bluff Master Association by virtue of, and I'm quoting the letter, our shared community boundary and common interest. I read it twice at my kitchen table. Then, I drove up to the clubhouse to talk to somebody, like a reasonable man. Diane met me at the door of the clubhouse in a tennis skirt, holding a clipboard, with a younger woman trailing behind her, taking notes on a tablet. She was somewhere in her early 50s, trim, with a sharp blonde bob and sunglasses pushed up on her head, even though we were standing in the shade. There was a golf cart parked sideways, across 2 spaces behind her, gleaming, with the association seal stuck to the door. She did not invite me in. She did not even let me get all the way up the steps. "Mr. Hale," she said, before I had finished my first sentence, "your parcel sits inside our gates. That makes it functionally part of our jurisdiction. The board voted. It's really not complicated." I told her my land sat outside their gates, that the gate had been built across the county road on an easement my deed predated by 19 years, and that I had never signed a single covenant in my life. I told her I had the recorded survey out in my truck, and that it would take 10 minutes to walk her through it. She looked past me at my truck the way a person looks at weather they have decided not to acknowledge. The younger woman's stylus paused over the tablet. "We have professionals who handle documentation," Diane said. "I really don't need to come look at the bed of your pickup." "It's the original survey," I said, "recorded at the county. It measures from the section monument." "We'll send you the documentation," she said, and she smiled at me, the way you smile at a child who has mispronounced a word. And she turned around, and the cart hummed. And that was the end of the conversation. I stood on the clubhouse steps a moment, in the smell of fresh-cut grass and chlorine off the pool, and I understood that I had just met someone who had decided the truth in advance and considered the evidence of rudeness. I went home and started a folder, a plain manila folder with the date written on the tab in pencil. I put the letter in it. I wrote a 1-page memo describing the conversation at the clubhouse, the date, the time, who was present, and what was said, and I signed it and put it in the folder too. I had done this for 34 years with troubled loans. You write it down while it is fresh, you keep the record clean, and you never ever raise your voice because the record raises its voice for you later. That folder would grow over the next 2 years until it needed a banker's box of its own. By the end, I had 4 boxes. The second escalation came that summer. A man in a polo shirt, with a laminated badge clipped to his pocket, showed up at my gate on a hot July morning and announced he was there to conduct a compliance inspection of my workshop. He had a clipboard, too. "It must be standard issue." "Who do you work for?" I asked him. "The association," he said. Like that settled it. "Are you a county code officer?" He shifted his weight. "I'm authorized by the HOA to inspect for compliance." "That's not what I asked." "A county inspector carries a state credential." "Can I see yours?" He didn't have one. He told me he didn't need one, that the association had authority here, and the more he talked, the less certain he sounded, until he was just repeating the word authority, like it might start meaning something if he said it enough. I stood in my own driveway with the cicadas going in the cottonwoods, and I told him, calm as church, that he was welcome to look at anything visible from the county road, and not 1 inch past my gate. He looked at my gate. Then he got back in his car and left. I wrote down his name, the time, the make of his car, and exactly what he had claimed, and that night it went in the folder. Incident number 2. May watched the whole thing from the porch, and afterward she said, "He had a badge from an office supply store, Dad. I could see the lamination bubbles. I told her she had a good eye, and I had her write down what she saw and sign it. And that went in the folder too. That fall, my customers started getting letters. Not me. My customers. The man who brought me his tiller, the rancher whose generator I rebuilt, the widow down the road whose mower I kept alive every spring. Each of them got a notice on association letterhead warning that patronizing an unpermitted commercial operation within the community could expose them to fines. 2 of them stopped coming, and I did not blame them, because a fine is a real thing in a fixed-income house, and a workshop favor is not. One of them, a retired ironworker named Sal Petro, drove his old flatbed up my driveway one evening and got out slow, the way men our age get out of trucks, and handed me his letter with 2 fingers like it was something he had picked up off the road. "Walter," he said, "this is the dumbest thing I have ever read in my life, and I worked 30 years for the county." He tapped the letterhead. "She sent this to me because you fixed my welder, and you fixed my welder for a jar of my wife's pickles." "I know it, Sal. They can't do this. They're doing it," I said. "But I'm keeping every piece of it." He looked at me a long moment, and then he handed the letter. "The rest of the way over. Then you have this for whatever you're building," he said. I thanked him and walked it straight into the house and dated the tab and put it in the folder. Sal would come back into this story later, and when he did, it mattered. And I want you to remember his name, because the people who keep their own letters are the people who win these things in the end. I want to tell you what I was feeling through all of this, because I think it is the part people get wrong. I was not afraid. I had spent a career watching people who thought paperwork was just paper learn the hard way that it was the only thing that was real. What I felt, mostly, was a slow tightening behind my sternum. The same thing I felt the morning Carol's doctor used the word we had been dreading. Not panic. Just the body understanding that something serious had arrived and was not going to leave on its own. So, I did what I always did. I filed. By the start of the 2nd year, I had a tally. 6 customer harassment notices. 2 formal fines mailed to my house for violations of covenants I had never agreed to, totaling $4,000, neither of which I paid and both of which I documented. That was 11 separate acts, each one in the folder, each one dated, each one describing exactly who did what. It was around then that I learned about the husband. I learned it the way you learn most true things, sideways and by accident. I was at the county clerk's office on a slow Monday pulling a certified copy of the Cedar Bluff plat from my folder, and the clerk, a patient woman named Rosa who had helped me a dozen times over the years, slid the copy across the counter and then paused. "You're the 2nd person this month asking about that development," she said. "The company's back in front of the Planning Commission. Phase 3, they're calling it." "What's Phase 3? 40 new lots on the slope below the ridge." She tilted her head. "You didn't hear it from me, but they've been having trouble with access. Something about the eastern boundary. The eastern boundary was my pasture." I asked her who the developer actually was, the principal, not the project name. She turned her monitor toward me and pointed with the pen. The principal listed on the filing was a limited liability company, and the registered agent of that company, the name on the line, was a man named Greg Coyle, Diane's husband. I thanked Rosa, and I drove home. And I sat in my truck in my own driveway for a long time with the engine off and the plat copy on the seat beside me. The whole shape of it came clear at once. The way a survey comes clear when you finally find the original monument, and everything else measures from it. The harassment was not about my workshop. It was not about aesthetic harmony or community standards or any of the words on the letterhead. Greg Coyle needed road access and drainage easements across the eastern edge of the development to make Phase 3 pencil out, and the cleanest, cheapest path ran straight through my 11 acres. If they could fold my land into the association or fine me, until I gave up and sold, the access problem solved itself for free. Diane was not a busybody with a clipboard. She was the front end of a land grab, and her husband was the money standing behind her. That changed things. Not what I would do, but how carefully I would do it. Here is the part I had not told anyone, not even May. Around the same time I was building that folder, in the ordinary course of managing my own retirement money, my little lending fund had been offered a package of loans by a regional bank trimming its portfolio. I had done this kind of thing for 34 years on the institutional side. And on my own account, it was simply how I kept my money working without putting it in front of a screen all day. I bought a handful of those loans at a discount, the way you do, sight largely unseen beyond the credit reports and the loan-to-value ratios. One of them, I did not even register at first, was a jumbo mortgage on a property up on Cedar Bluff Ridge. It was 3 months later, on an ordinary evening, reconciling the monthly servicing reports at my kitchen table, that I saw the borrower name and the property address line up. And I set my pencil down, and I understood exactly what I was holding. I was collecting the monthly payments on Diane and Greg Coyle's house. The deed of trust on their 4,000-square-foot showpiece ran to my fund, and my fund was me. I told no one. I did not write it in the folder, because it did not belong in the folder. I simply kept that file too, clean, current, the way I kept everything, in a separate drawer. And I went on filing the harassment in the first drawer, and for a long while the 2 drawers did not touch. A reasonable person might ask why I didn't use it right then. Because that is not how the work is done. You do not pull a lever until you know exactly what it is connected to. So I waited, and I watched, and I let the folder grow. The 3rd year is when it turned ugly. On a Thursday morning in February, I came back from town with a sack of groceries to find that someone had cut the chain on my back gate, the one that opens onto the old logging track at the rear of my property, and a survey crew was setting stakes across my pasture. Bright pink flags in a line that ran exactly where you would put a road. I set the groceries on the tailgate, parked my truck sideways across the track so nothing could come or go, and walked out to them across the frozen grass. The crew chief was a heavy-set man in a reflective vest, apologetic and confused. The moment he saw my face, "This your land?" he asked. "It is. Has been since 1971. He showed me his work order. His hand was cold, and the paper shook a little in the wind. It had been issued by the development company and described my pasture as a future right-of-way, parcel pending acquisition. They told me the access was secured, he said. They told me this was a done deal. It isn't, I said. There's no easement. There's no sale. You're standing on a paid-off family parcel, and you need to pull your stakes. He did. He pulled every flag, himself, walked the line back, gathering them up, and he was decent about it. And I have never blamed him for a minute of it. He was a working man doing what a clipboard told him. Before he left, though, I photographed the cut chain where it lay in the mud, links sheared clean by a bolt cutter, and I photographed the line of holes where the stakes had been, and I bagged the cut chain itself in a contractor bag and labeled it with the date and marker. That night I called the sheriff's office and filed a report for criminal trespass and destruction of property. Incident number, by then, 14. The deputy who came out was a steady young man named Tom Reyes. He walked the back gate with me in the cold, crouched down and looked at the sheared chain links without touching them. And he was honest with me, the way good officers are. A survey crew with a paperwork order is a gray area, Mr. Hale, he said. I'll file the trespass report, but I'll be straight with you. A prosecutor probably won't touch a single instance of this. What you've really got here is a civil pattern. I know it, I told him. I'm building the pattern. He stood up, and he looked at me a second, and then he said something I wrote down word for word that night. He said, then keep building it. If this keeps escalating, what's going to matter is whether you've got a clear record showing they cross the same line over and over after being told to stop. You build that record, and one day it stops being a gray area. He told me the thing prosecutors like to see was a documented, repeated pattern. 3 or 4 clear incidents, minimum after a written cease and desist. I already had that and a good deal more. I sent him a copy of the folder the next morning, certified mail, return receipt requested, so there would be a record that the sheriff's office had received it on a date I could prove. I want to be clear that Deputy Reyes never took my side. He took the facts side. That is the only side I ever asked anyone to take. Through all of this, May was watching. She was the one who had photographed the survey crew from her bedroom window, while I walked out to talk to them, 3 clear shots with a timestamp, because I had taught her that a photo without a timestamp is just a rumor. She was the one who, when the customer letters started, said, "Dad, why don't they just look at the deed?" And I told her, because looking would mean they were wrong, and they have decided not to be wrong. She kept her own small notebook after that, and once a week she would ask me, "Did you write it down?" And I always had. The fines kept coming. By the middle of the 3rd year, the association claimed I owed them $11,000 in accumulated penalties, late fees, and what they called special assessments. I paid none of it. Every notice went in the folder. Diane started showing up at the end of my driveway in her husband's white SUV, the one with the vanity plate. And she would sit there, with the engine running for a few minutes, and then drive off. And I understood that this was meant to feel like pressure. The first time May came in from the porch, stood at the kitchen window watching the SUV. "She's just sitting there," May said. "I know. That's creepy, Dad." "It's meant to be," I said. "Get the time, would you?" And May looked at the stove clock and read it off. And I started a separate log just for the SUV. Date, time, duration. It was almost peaceful, writing those entries. The more she pushed, the cleaner my record got. And the cleaner my record got, the more certain the ending became. There were 11 entries in the SUV log before it was over. I know, because every one of them ended up in front of a judge. Then came the lien. That brings us back to the cold morning in March, the 3rd March, when she slid that single sheet under my door at 6 in the morning and read it aloud through the wood like she wanted May to hear it too. $90,000. A lien against my home. Recorded, she said, at the county the day before. She told me through the door that I had 30 days, and then they would foreclose, and then they would sell my house on the courthouse steps to satisfy the debt. I opened the door. She took a step back, surprised, I think, that I was not shouting. "Diane," I said, "you recorded a lien on my house yesterday. The board voted," she said. "You've ignored every notice for 3 years. This is what happens." She had the clipboard against her chest like a breastplate. "I'd suggest you find a lawyer, Mr. Hale, or find a buyer. Frankly, your situation up here is becoming functionally unsustainable, and it's part of our jurisdiction whether you like it or not." That was the third time in 3 years, in 3 different places, that she had used that word about my land. Jurisdiction. I had it in the folder all 3 times. "I'll look the lien over," I said. "Have a good morning." And I closed the door. I want you to understand the discipline that took, because it is the whole point of this story. Behind that door, I was holding a piece of paper that could erase her family inside of 90 days. And she had just handed me a piece of paper she believed could erase mine. The difference between us, the only difference that mattered, was that her paper was a bluff, and mine was recorded, perfected, and current. She had not checked. In 3 years of escalating against me, Diane Coyle had never once asked the simplest question a person in her position should ask, which is, who exactly am I picking a fight with, and what exactly does he hold? She had decided I was a stubborn old man with a workshop. She never looked, so I went and looked at her. That afternoon, I called the servicing company and requested a full reinstatement and payoff statement on the loan secured by the property up on the ridge, along with the complete payment history. I had every right to it. I owned the note. The file came back clean and ordinary, which was its own kind of information. The Coyles were not behind. They paid on time. They had equity. This was a family with a great deal to lose, and no idea that the man they were trying to push off his land was the one quietly holding the largest single claim against everything they owned. I did not feel triumphant reading it. I felt the same tightening behind my sternum, because I knew what I was now obligated to do with it, and I knew it had to be done correctly or not at all. I did not foreclose. I want to say that plainly, because the easy version of this story is the one where I crush her. And that is not what happened, and not who I am. I called my attorney, a careful woman named Pris Okafor, who had handled my funds paperwork for years, and I laid the whole thing out for her. The folder, and the lien, and the note. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Walter, you have 2 completely separate matters here, and the strong play is to keep them separate and let the law do the work in public." That was exactly right. The lien on my house was void on its face, a fraudulent claim by an association with no jurisdiction over a parcel that predated it. We did not need the mortgage to beat the lien. The mortgage was something else. The mortgage was the leverage that would make sure this never happened to anyone in Cedar Bluff again. We filed 2 things at once. The first was a motion in district court to quiet title and to expunge the fraudulent lien, with my folder attached as exhibits: 3 years of dated incidents, the void annexation letter, the fake inspector, the customer harassment, the cut chain and trespass report. The second was a complaint to the State Real Estate Division about the association's pattern of recording fraudulent liens, because mine, it turned out, was not the only one. Sal the iron worker had gotten one too, smaller, on a dispute about a fence, and so had 2 other families on the eastern edge, all of them conveniently sitting where Greg Coyle needed his road. That was the pattern. The hearing was set for a Wednesday morning in May at the county courthouse, in the same building where Diane had recorded her lien. I want to tell you about that morning slowly, because it is the part that matters most, and because it happened almost without anyone raising their voice. The courtroom was small. Diane was there in a bright magenta blazer, sitting beside the association's lawyer, a young man who kept shuffling papers. Greg Coyle sat in the back row in an expensive jacket, arms crossed, the way a man sits when he believes he is above the proceeding he is attending. Sal was there, and the 2 other families, and Deputy Reyes in the back, in his uniform, off-duty, there, on his own time. And May was there, 16, and straight-backed in the second row. Because I had asked her if she wanted to see how it ended, and she had said, "I wrote half of it down, Dad. I'm coming." The judge was a woman named Helen Briggs, near retirement, with reading glasses on a chain and no patience for theater. She had read the file. You could tell within the first 2 minutes that she had read the file, because she stopped the association's lawyer the moment he started talking about community standards. "Counselor," she said, "show me where this homeowner signed a covenant agreeing to your association's authority. Show me the recorded instrument." The lawyer looked at Diane. Diane looked at the lawyer. Anne. There was no such instrument, and everyone in that room who had done their reading already knew it. The lawyer said something about implied membership and shared infrastructure, and the judge let him finish out of courtesy and then said nothing at all, which was worse than anything she could have said. Then it was my turn. I did not give a speech. Pris had told me not to, and she was right. And besides, it is not my way. I walked to the front, and the room went quiet enough that I could hear my own boots on the floor. I laid one document on the rail in front of the judge. It was my deed of trust, the original, recorded in this same county in 1971, 19 years before the Cedar Bluff plat was ever filed. I laid the recorded survey down beside it, unfolded it flat with both hands so the surveyor's seal faced up. And I said, "Your Honor, my property line is the original section monument. Everything in this county measures from it. The association's own plat measures from it too. My deed is the older instrument, and it was recorded first." Judge Briggs leaned forward. She looked at the deed for a long moment. She looked at the recording stamp and the date and the original surveyor's seal pressed into the corner of the survey 50 years before. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside a lawnmower started and then stopped, and in the silence after it I could hear Diane's chair creak as she shifted in it. The judge took off her reading glasses and let them fall against her chest on the chain. "This lien," she said, holding up the association's $90,000 claim between two fingers, as if it were something she had found on the bottom of her shoe, "is recorded against a property over which this association has demonstrated no legal authority whatsoever. No covenant, no annexation, no recorded instrument of any kind. It is void. It is expunged as of this moment." She set it down, and she did not set it down gently. And given the documented pattern of similar filings represented in this exhibit list against this owner and against at least 3 others along the same boundary, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for review. She looked over the top of the bench at Diane, and she held the look. "Madam President," she said, "you recorded a fraudulent encumbrance against a paid-off family home. You did it after this man told you. In writing, more than a dozen times, exactly where your authority ended. Do you understand what that exposes your association to? Do you understand what it exposes you to? We were acting on the advice of—" She started, and the judge held up one hand. Just one hand. Palm out. And Diane sat back down. And that was the last thing she said in that courtroom. I did not look at her for long. I looked at May in the second row, straight-backed, and May looked at me, and neither of us smiled, because it was not that kind of moment. It was quieter than that. It was the moment a promise made in a kitchen years before finished keeping itself. Here are the 2 numbers I want you to hold next to each other because they are the whole story. The lien against my home was for $90,000. The amount the association ever lawfully collected from me across 3 years was 0. Not $1. Every fine, every assessment, every penalty void from the first letter because the authority behind them never existed. 3 years of pressure. And the true balance was 0 on one side, and a referral to the district attorney on the other. The mortgage, though, was something else. And I told you it would be. I want to be precise about that, because it would have been the easy and ugly thing to do, and the law gave me a cleaner instrument. What happened to Greg Coyle's Phase 3 happened on its own, the way these things do once the facts are in public. The quiet title ruling killed the access. Without a road across my eastern pasture, and with the Eastern Edge families now protected by the same ruling, the development had no legal path for its drainage and its road. Phase 3 could not pencil out. And there was one more thing I did not expect, which was that a woman who had sat on the association board for 2 years, a quiet bookkeeper named Lien, who had voted against the lien and been outvoted, walked into the district attorney's office the week after the hearing with a folder of her own. She had kept her own records. She had board minutes showing the lien vote, emails between Diane and the development company, and a memo that laid out the access problem in plain dollars. She told the investigator she had not been able to sleep since the vote. People who keep their own letters, I told you, are the people who win these things. The bank that had committed to fund Greg's construction loan read the news of the district attorney referral and the void liens, got nervous about the title questions hanging over the whole project, and pulled its commitment. The development that the harassment had been built to serve collapsed under the weight of the harassment itself. Diane tried to take my land to build her husband's road. The attempt to take it is exactly what made the road impossible. She lost the one thing the whole scheme had been for, and she lost it because she never once stopped to read the deed she was fighting. And the mortgage I held on their house. I kept collecting the payments, on time, every month, the way I always had. I never told them I held it. I did not need to. The leverage was never the point. The point was that I could have at any moment in those 3 years, and I did not, because a man who keeps clean records does not need to play dirty. The records win on their own. I think that is the part Diane never understood. She thought power was the clipboard and the letterhead in the board vote. Power was the older deed, kept in a folder, recorded 50 years before she ever pushed her sunglasses up on her head and called my home part of her jurisdiction. The Coyles put the Ridge House up for sale that fall and moved out of the county. I watched the listing come and go. The loan paid off at closing in full to a servicing company with a post office box in Denver, and the funds landed in an account with my name on the signature card, and that was the end of my involvement with Diane Coyle. She never knew. To this day, I would bet, she does not know that the man she tried to evict held the note on her own front door the entire time. That is fine with me. The not knowing is its own kind of justice. I came home from that courthouse on the Wednesday in May, and May was sitting on the back porch steps with Biscuit's head in her lap, looking out at the pasture where the pink survey flags had been. All of them gone now, the grass grown back over the holes. She did not ask me how it went. She had been there. She had watched the judge hold up the lien like a dead thing. She just said, "Mom would have liked that judge." And I sat down next to her on the step, and the old dog shifted over to make room, and we watched the light go long across the 11 acres her mother and I had bought before any of this was anyone's community. I did not say anything for a while. There was nothing that needed saying. The land was ours. The record was clean. The girl was safe. Then May said, "Did you write it down?" And I told her I had, every word. So here's what I want you to take from this. Plainly, because I promised you a lesson, and a man should keep his word. If you own property, pull your deed and read it. The actual recorded instrument, not the summary the title company sent you. Know where your lines run and what monument they measure from, and if you do not know, hire a licensed surveyor and find out, because the ground does not lie. And the deed does not lie, but people will lie to you about both. When someone with a clipboard and a letterhead tells you that you are subject to their authority, ask them to show you the recorded instrument where you agreed to it, and if they cannot, you are not. Keep a folder. Date everything. Write the memo while the conversation is fresh. Sign it and put it away. Send your important records by certified mail so there is proof of receipt. File the complaint even when the deputy tells you a prosecutor probably will not act on it yet, because the record you build is what turns a gray area into a clear one. And never, ever raise your voice when you can raise a document instead. The calm man with the older paper wins, not because he is clever, but because he was patient enough to keep the record while everyone else was busy being certain. If you have got a story like this, an HOA or a code office or a clipboard that decided your home was theirs to manage, drop it in the comments. I read them and I learned from them, and some of them are going to become the next stories I tell. If this one was worth your time, subscribe so the next one finds you. Because next week, I am going to tell you about a retired pipeline welder whose HOA tried to condemn his garage as a public nuisance, not knowing he still held the mineral rights under the entire subdivision, and what happened the morning the gas company came knocking on the board president's door instead of his. I will see you then.